lost my spot. No, I'm only kidding. Um, Her professional experience spans the entire spectrum of substance use disorder prevention through recovery. Daisy has leveraged her lived experience, education, and bilingualism. I can't believe I said that to support and advance racial justice and empower individuals who are overrepresented in the behavioral health and social service, resulting from negative impacts on the social determinants of health, including reentry needs. Daisy begins her career as a peer recovery coach, supporting people in the quest towards recovery. She has held roles as recovery coach, supervisor, and program manager. Daisy has also served as a clinician for medicated assisted treatment in the opioid use disorder treatment programs. She has been a Recovery Coach Academy trainer for bilingual cohorts. Daisy has a master's of social work from Westfield State University. Yay, so let's just welcome Daisy.
Thank you. That sounds so pretty. You must have got that from my employer. Those are the what my lived experience has kind of encouraged me to obtain, to empower not just myself, right, in my voice, but also share that power with individuals who struggle with substance use, mental health, and lived experience with with the criminal justice system, and most importantly, the Department of Children and Families. So who is, I mean, that is really me, right? But those are my accomplishments. My biggest flex are being a woman in sustained recovery. Last February, I celebrated 10 years in recovery. So I'm technically just a 10-year-old. I've been adulting for 10 years, I would say, right? I am a mother of the most thoughtful, caring 24-year-old young man turning 60 because he's an old soul, and 2 dogs and a cat. I like to, I'm a proud Puerto Rican. I'm a loud Puerto Rican. All the stereotypes of Puerto Ricans, I check all the boxes, and I'm proud to. I am not a warm cloth child. You know, I got thick skin. I grew up in an old school Puerto Rican home in the north end of Springfield, which I call Little Puerto Rico. There are many little Puerto Ricos in Massachusetts, right? Um, but when I think about my story of sustained recovery, to be honest, like I don't even know. Like I didn't go into recovery knowing that I wanted recovery, and I'll break that down for you, right? My pathway to recovery was the criminal justice system. I had a non-English speaking grandmother who will shut it down at the courthouse and shut it down at residential and detox centers, and no driver's license, but always managed to get me to the farthest detoxes. And this girl wasn't ready and would always hitchhike back to Springfield. Um, but I was lucky to have, you know, a loving, caring grandmother who would pick up my pieces and always open her doors for me and hide her purse, but open her door for me, and always gave me a cot to sleep in the living room, and fed me, and took my kid when I couldn't even care for myself. That allowed me the opportunity to experience real love during hardship, to experience support in my lowest and darkest moments, um, but always encourage me to strive to do better and be better for her, for my child. And it's in the in carceral settings that I really experience community organizing, right? Where I knew that something wasn't right. I'm a bias, and I lean towards, you know, the needs of women, and I admit my biases. I work through them, and I try to be aware of them so that I can support men in an equal form. But men have a lot of support, right? Let's keep it real, right? There's a lot of support out there, resources for men. And it's very limited for women, despite, data showing that women report being primary caretakers of their children at intakes in criminal justice setting or in carceral settings and in inpatient treatment. And so I always lean towards, but wait a minute, if men get this, I'm doing it right now in my church too, right? Because small groups in my church are offered to men, and then but they're in the Hampden County men's jail, but they're not offered for women. So I've been advocating about getting that same small group. And I know biases are not healthy, but I'm just trying to be a voice. But my first experience, or my personal experience with DEI, which I prefer EID, right? EIDJ, because when I was incarcerated, I noticed that, visits for men, there was always like this long waiting list, and I can see I was in Ludlow when the men and the women were together. And I can see, all these men through my window going to visit and going to visit, and very little amounts of women going to visit. And it made me feel some type of way. I always went to visit, but I knew a lot of my friends didn't go to visit because my grandma would go visit me at any jail, any state or county. My grandma would go visit in detox residential centers, but my friends didn't have that. My son will come visit, and many of my peers, not all of them were friends, but my peers weren't able to see their kids because they were either in DCF custody or had lost full custody of their children, right? And I felt this need to always speak up about it. And that was I would say my first awareness to the lack of equity when it came to, accessibility for women and rights for women. Because I grew up in the North End, but I grew up in a really diverse neighborhood. Well, not very diverse, but we had like one Caucasian family, and they spoke Spanish, so they were like honorary Puerto Ricans, right? And there was two African American or Black families, and they too, like the mom in one family spoke a little bit of Spanish, and the other one family understood. Um, and so they too were honorary Puerto Ricans, right? But growing up in the North End, where majority of women were single moms and the grandmothers were who cared for the children when they were in detox, I wasn't really aware of it, right, growing up. And it wasn't until I was in the setting, carceral setting or treatment settings, that I was like, wait a minute, like, who's there for who has a Doña Gloria, right? Who's there for them, like my grandmothers. And it made me really sad inside to have that awareness. And we started creating like support groups around, and it wasn't officially support groups. We would just sit on like the rec deck and talk about, bring bring up our albums and start talking about our family and our kids. And it felt, now that I think about it, like a little support group within the setting. Despite people's charges, we would, you got some beef and cheese, I got the soup, I got the wrap, let's put it together and make a soup, because a lot of women didn't have support for like canteen. I remember cutting deodorants in half to share deodorants because a lot of women didn't get canteen or support from outside family. Then when I was at one of my releases, actually my last release, I became part of a organization that was called Neighbor. It is called Neighbor to Neighbor, and there's some community organizing around the right to vote, around getting people with incarcerated Corys or Corey history to be able to work in the casino. We were organizing for that before it was built out here in Springfield, to be able to give them opportunities to work in the casino, and inputting our voice around having equal amounts of women and men helping build it and helping work in it. And that felt really empowering to me. When we think of EID, right, it's kind of been professionalized, right? And organizations want to check the box, and professionals want to be EID experts, and it's become this framework that organizations and individuals check the box either as a job or as a requirement of the organization. But I think it falls short of EID and justice, right? When we professionalize it in that way. My current role right now is as the director of peer recovery technical assistance with the new Mass Recovery Education Collaborative, which I absolutely love, right? Because I remember going through school and thinking, I don't want to be a clinician. I don't want to be a researcher, right? And I absolutely have fallen in love with both of those roles. That helps me, inform the work that I do in the REC as technical assistant. I fell in love with data, working for C4 Innovations, which is a partner of MOAR and of Bay State Community Services and of Torchlight, and moving forward the mission and vision of the Recovery Education Collaborative. But looking at the data and seeing how certain regions in Mass and certain populations in Mass are underserved, it just like motivates me, right? Just like I was motivated to speak up about, oh, can we do something about like visits for families and increasing, access to basic needs for women in the incarceral setting, even creating a newsletter in Framingham State Prison for the inmates. I remember bugging my counselor so much about that because I felt like women needed more than just hood books to read, even though I probably read all the hood books that have been published, right? And it created, it had a resource page for people who were getting out. It had little activities you could do over the phone with your kids and stuff like that. And empowering it in that setting is really different than empowering out in the community, because I feel like with the Recovery Education Collaborative and knowing in my role and knowing the data that's out there, right, of the amount of service providers that are in certain regions, and knowing the enrollment population, the population or the individuals that are enrolling in certain regions, and their ethnic demographic or their income demographic, knowing that allows me to shape a strategy to target and support the organization or the areas and the individuals that are not represented or represented by low numbers in that data. So I fell in love with data in that way. And I think that, creating and supporting individuals and becoming peers, be it peer recovery coaches, which is, what we're really focused on, but supporting, creating a bridge for other individuals to, be peer specialists or family peers or any other peers can just help create access for individuals like me. I remember one time sitting in a meeting with Julia, who's kind of like our pioneer in the peer workforce, right, in terms of recovery coaches in Mass. And she has shared a map of the state of Massachusetts. And in that map, she had created pins of all the settings that peers were working out of. And I remember in that meeting as a facilitator getting extremely emotional because I felt like, wow, we're getting somewhere, right? It was mixed emotions too, because I grew up in a household with untreated mental health, untreated substance use, trauma, DCF, and it saddened me to think that, all the people that I've seen pass away from this Cunning's, disease, could have had resources. But at the same time, it was mixed emotions because I was like, nice, I could be part of this. You know what I'm saying? Like, we finally have something that can help empower people. I would have never thought that a job description would say, do you have lived experience in such and such? Like, that just, employment, people talk about basic needs, and employment is part of that basic needs. It's not mentioned by Prochaska, Maslow, right? But employment is a basic need. If you don't have finances, you can't get none of those basic needs. So there's a basic need, a pre-basic need, let's say, right? And to be able to offer an individual an opportunity to leverage their lived experience on a spectrum of lived experience, right? Because we're not just talking about substance use or mental health. We're talking about lived experience with the criminal justice system, lived experience in working with DCF or Department of Children and Families, and lived experience in trauma. There's this intersectionality that helps empower people to use those experiences to help other people. And that I don't know about any other peer in the call, but I feel that that has helped me maintain my own recovery, right? Being in a role where I can leverage those experiences. And it's like post-traumatic growth, right? In a sense, because I'm using my experiences to help somebody else. And by helping somebody else, I'm helping myself. Not to make it sound selfish, but it's like knocking two windows with one stone, right? And it encourages people to maintain. It's like a fuel that encourages me, at least I can't speak for everybody else, to maintain this recovery lifestyle, to be aware of how I show up for people, right? In terms of EID and being just. Um, I feel like I'm rambling, but because I'm nervous, which is weird because I could present and facilitate for 8-hour trainings for 5 days, and when it has to do with talking about myself, I always get nervous. If anybody else can identify with that, but when I think about EID and my experience and how it intertwines or morphs with my professional life, um, thank you. Um, I feel like working in grants for the state or working as recovery coaches or as peers, like we become public figures, right? My mentor used to always say this, right? We become public figures because we can't just, it's not a do as I say, not as I do kind of role, right? You have to, recovery is a lifestyle, and your actions really inform people of your credibility, of the value of your word, of the value of your recovery. And we're not perfect, at least I'm not. I don't know about everybody else, but and I don't, not that I don't want to be perfect, but I just want to be better than who I was yesterday, even in these 10 years of recovery. And I think that, and I always add the justice part to equity, inclusion, and diversity, because I find that without equity and being intentional about offering people what they need, right, that we can lead into inclusivity, right? Because then we're creating opportunities for people to be included because we're offering them what they need, which then creates diversity. But all in all together is where justice comes, right? Because when I think of the inclusion of justice in the EID, that not too many people do it, but it feels like justice in action, right? When we are able to meet equity that supports inclusivity and creates diversity in spaces, access to services and treatment and all that you can think of, um, that we do as human beings that is necessary. But justice and truth is truth in action. And I often think of a quote by Benjamin Disraeli. And when we think about justice in action, his quote captures the essence of justice as truth in action. This phrase encapsulates a fundamental idea that justice, it goes beyond the mere recognition of what's right and wrong, right? It really looks at our internal views, our values, our principles as individuals to uplift truth, and it be part of all that we do. When we lead through equity, by being intentional about creating opportunities that meet the needs of individual people, right? Because we all might have the same need, but we might need it differently, right? Our needs are met differently. And when we intentionally create that, then we are able to, right, make that ability to be inclusive. And that doesn't happen for us to create diversity without being, you know, true about what we're doing. I've had positive and negative um, engagements or interactions with people who have this I'm all for EID response, right? And an example of positive would be people who, I don't know, organization is offering free bikes to everybody, all the kids of the employees, right? But my kid is autistic and has physical limitations, which means that my kid is not going to be able to enjoy that equal sharing of bicycles for all the kids, right? So if my organization was really true to equity, they would give me a bike for my kid that was adaptable to his needs, if that makes sense, right? When we think about this truth of being just, then I would be able to speak up and say, hey, I appreciate the opportunity to get this bike. I commend the organization for thinking about our kids. And I'm just wondering if there's a possibility that I can get a customized bike because my child is autistic and has physical limitations, right? This is where the organization, I'll be like, wait, what? That would cost more money, and they'll get into costs and have these all these barriers, and my kid might not even get an opportunity for a bike. And a good positive interaction would be like they would get me a bike that's maybe for a disabled child to be able to ride a bike, right? Or motorized or whatever. I've also had negative experiences with EID where people, you know, have the bobblehead response like they do for multiple pathways, right? And that's another story. But where they will say they're all for EID, but then they lean towards their people. I think to really be, you know, an advocate and a supporter of EID in our roles, it's important for us to do that self-check and self-awareness, right? Because or internal work, because we all have biases that feed where we lean towards, right? And I have it towards women. I've already, you know, I've acknowledged it, and I'm intentional of how I show up for the men because, you know, they need services too, and they need support to reach, to meet their needs. Um, but it's when we don't check our biases and our stigmas that we get ourselves into trouble and lean away from EID and lack justice for everyone, right? Unfortunately, I've been in situations where, um, like I shared, people talk the good talk, but they don't walk the good walk. And I don't know if it's my lived experience or my culture or heritage, but I'm not one to warm cloth, like my grandma said, warm cloth things. And I've learned to be more professional in my, you know, speaking up. But there was a time where it was tough, and you know, I would make enemies in my work environments because I didn't filter things. And I said what I felt what I said, and had to learn the hard way that it's not like that in these type of settings, in the professional setting. I worked for OTP clinic one time where I started noticing patterns of individuals being denied opiate, OTP, methadone, because they didn't have a history of substance use treatment, which blew my mind because I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So you're the doctor, I'm a little old social worker. This person meets criteria for a substance use disorder per the DSM, not per me. But because they don't have history, you're not going to treat them. And it was the hardest space for me to work in. But being who I am, and some of those old school active use skills, antennas were like activated every time I went to work. I started tracking numbers and tracking methadone dosages, and the pattern, my theory, proved the pattern. And so I had to speak up, and I you know, by this time I had my professional filters in, so I was able to speak up how I was supposed to do grievances, right? But it was tough. It was tough because I really wanted to respond as who I am, genuinely outside the professional space. But changes were made, and the patterns were observed, the changes were made, and a new medical director was brought in, who was more empathetic, right? We talked about a lot of barriers to treatment when it comes to mental health and substance use. And oftentimes people say, oh, the hospital setting, the medical setting has all these barriers and stigmas for people who have substance use disorder and mental health. But truth of the matter is, they're all over the place. They're systemic, right? They're in mental health, behavioral health. In that same setting, I remember the nurse director, the nurse manager saying, oh, if that person was in detox, they have to go to TSS, and they have to go to then, or CSS and then TSS. And in my head, I was like, so did you miss the memo? There's no wrong door. Because that's the whole policy, right? And I had to really check myself about how I was gonna inform this person that they should really check. And I had to do it with another clinical director too, that would send me an email once a month. Hey, I'm just checking in. What's the recovery process of this person? How strong are they in their recovery to see if they qualify for Hep C treatment? And in my head, I could feel myself getting hot. And I was like, okay, so does this person not know that everybody qualifies independent of what the recovery status is? So then I had to be right, because now I can't talk from feeling. Now I got to get the data and show it. So I had to look for the policy from Mass Health, and to inform these people that are higher than me in their role. And I'm like, okay, so did they miss the memo? Am I the only one that is keeping track of this stuff? It was so frustrating to work in that setting. But I hope that, I left a mark, and changes did happen before I left, but I just couldn't, for my sanity, I couldn't work in that type of environment, right? That, people were oppressing and creating barriers for individuals in their treatment, right? And the autonomy to their treatment. I absolutely love what I do. People say, oh, you work too much. And it doesn't feel like it. I mean, my part-time job, I work hybrids, because I'm still working towards my LICSW hours. And so I do clinical work in the evenings, and during the day I do workforce development, research, social work stuff. But I absolutely love what I do. It doesn't feel like work, and maybe that's why I do it so happily. Working in direct care felt hard for me because changing systems, in a implosive kind of way from the inside out, it's a lot harder. And so I feel like in the workforce development role, I have an opportunity to plant a seed of, being more self-aware of our biases, our stigma, which is one of the topics I absolutely love. Um, to facilitate at the company that I work for, C4 Innovations. And like I've been granted opportunities to train on DEI and train on stigma and bias to settings like DPHs. Last year, I was honored with that opportunity, and that's God, because Lord knows that 10 years ago, I wouldn't even, I say this a lot, but when I was detoxing in the county jail, if God could have sat next to me in my cell and said, girl, just hold on, you're gonna be doing great things in a couple of years, I would have asked to go to crisis, because I thought I would have been hallucinating. But I've been, able to train on, lived experience and the peer work and the value of peers, of stigma and bias, EID and injustice, to, like I said, boards of, it's called the Association of State and Territory Department of Public Health officials. For my favorite ones are the Sheriff Department associations, and did that for the Mass Sheriff Association on stigma and bias and dismantling stigma and bias in the workforce. And I have the honor to go to California and also train on Dismantling Stigma and Bias in the Workforce for the California Association of Sheriffs. And, you know, as a person with lived experience in a 19-page query, which I refuse to seal because there's no point. Like, you know, like there's no point. Certain settings are still going to be able to see that through that seal, and the law enforcement are going to be able to see through that seal. So what's the purpose, right? I'm already doing amazing, absolutely a job that I absolutely, both jobs that I absolutely love, and that allow me to do the work without, you know, telling me you can't do it because you got a Corey, right? If anything, my Corey is like my Girl Scouts badge, right? Different type of Girl Scouts, right? Not your typical. But I just you know, I'm just so honored and grateful to God for, you know, getting me through those difficult moments so that I can use those moments to help inform systems and help inform organizations and help uplift the lived experience of other people that have lived many of the same steps that I overcame. I don't know. I don't want to just keep. I wonder if anybody has questions. Can I do that, Julie?
Yes, I was gonna leave. You're right on time anyway, so
Okay.
we're gonna leave 15 minutes for, you know, questions and comments. But that was amazing, Daisy. You know, that was a great share, and I know I've myself got a lot out of that. Um, does anyone have any questions or comments?
I just wait a minute, just a minute, Nico. I just want to share one thing, right? I want to encourage everyone, right? You know that saying, if you see something, say something. Our internal, right, through our lived experience or not, a person that's really in tune to their empathetic self, right, can feel when something is not right. And it's important for us to be in tune with that because many systems still oppress us, maybe intentionally or not intentionally, right? But it's important for us to be aware of those internal warning signs because the more we help inform, right? Nothing about us without us. Before we help inform systems, we can only do that by speaking up. Maybe some of you have seasoned your speak up filter better than mine. Sometimes I still fail and I don't come off nice. But I swear they're all good intentions. So, you know, sometimes we could be a life-changing voice for someone.
Um, Thank you for saying that, Daisy. Yeah, I think my more seasoned speak up came when I turned 60. I don't know what happened.
I cannot believe you're 60, girl.
You know, so it came all of a sudden. I was like, I don't care. I'm just going to speak up. So, but Nico, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, Julie, thank you. Daisy, thank you very much for coming on here. I mean, we know each other, so it's like I'm hearing the story. But you know, I like when you say, you know, if you see something, say something, you know. And I've never have had that filter to just stay quiet. Um, and I don't ever want to lose it, you know, because I remember how it feels to be on the other side of things, looking in, wanting to be in, right? And just because you know you include me into it doesn't mean I have the equity to be there because of the past things I've been through, right? Big difference. You may let me in, but it doesn't mean that I could afford that plate to go sit with you guys. You know, so you know, thank you for talking about that because I'm sorry, guys. I have my family around me, but Daisy, I love you and thank you for sharing your story.
Let me just check.
Thank you, Nico.
Um, we got a couple of comments. Karen Larson says she was mesmerized.
Thank you, Karen. It's always a pleasure to share. You know, Karen has educated me in so many ways of by being inclusive, but being aware of, I look at life through a heterosexual woman with abilities, right? And Karen has helped me and expanded my awareness to, you know, the deaf and hard of hearing community, and so much so that it's got me back in school, you know, working on a certificate for deaf studies, but or deaf studies. And it's important for us to really look outside ourselves, because our experiences are shaped by our experiences, right? I can't speak to the experience of Black or an African American, right? Despite being a woman of color. I can't speak for the experience of a man, a Latino man. I can't speak, and it's important for us to really, you know, to be fully, you know, in tune in how would I say it? Creating equity, right, for things that we do, or populations, people, individuals that we don't identify with, by, you know, asking questions and you know, having the humility to want to learn and not think that we know it all, right? Because we'll be closing off ourselves if we just only think of things through our lens and our experiences. Marianne?
Oh, thank you. I totally enjoyed hearing you, and you are an inspiration in a very positive way. And I'm thinking of you, you know, being in prison and supporting others while you're there. You know, here's your piece of soap, here's yours, you know, I want to support you. And then moving on, and I'm inspired and want to be able to learn about what keeps you wanting to learn and go on for various, you know, certificates and supporting people at the same time.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
I'm just wanting to know what inspires you to be able to continue to want to support others, and while you're helping yourself with education and learning all these fabulous tools.
To be honest, I feel like education and helping others have become part of my recovery identity, right? We think about our pathways, we think about it being a lifestyle, and people say, oh, education is not a pathway, employment is not a pathway, but it has kept me doing the next right thing, the next right thing, the next right thing. And to be honest, I also believe the theory that, you know, and it's historical, right? It's not just a theory, but historically, you know, for the slaves, they didn't want them to get educated, because if they got educated, then they would know, right, what their rights were, and they would know to move on to other things. And I feel like the way for me to take power back from an oppressive, discriminatory system is to educate myself. And I do that even in my role as a clinician and as a peer coach, right? Knowing what policies are there, knowing what laws are out there to support us is important, because I can't just go to the, you know, to the DCF office and say, well, no, this and that out of my feelings. I have to have fact, right? And by informing myself through education and the different trainings, helps me empower other people, because I know I can't do it by myself, and I'm just creating a network, right? Like a village of people to support the movement, and if that makes sense.
Thank you for saying that, Daisy. I never thought of education as a pathway, but it most certainly can be.
And we have to normalize, I'm sorry to cut you off, Judy. We have to normalize the trades, right? I learned the hard way, and I was hurt when my son didn't want to go to college. But right now he's in the carpenters union, in the painters union, making more money than me, and reminds me every so often that he doesn't have student loans, right? And so we have to normalize multiple pathways of education for not just our kids, but also the people that we work with, right? For that financial independence that'll also give them power back.
Okay, is this you,
Wow.
Scotty? 5421?
That's
it is,
Sunshine
Julie.
Scotty.
Okay, Scotty.
Thank you, Julie. And Daisy, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, your inspiration and your message. The question I had, like in hearing about and knowing you is such a kind and generous person. When you got out and you started making progress on your recovery, you mentioned like you were there for your peers when you were incarcerated. How did you go about deciding who to keep in your life and who maybe to see less of, and the boundaries that you set? Because it can be hard creating a new life and figuring out who's a friend and who's an accomplice in our bad behavior. So how did you go about navigating that process?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Some of my bestest friends that I have for 20 plus years, I've met in an incarceral setting. I have a friend right now who's going into law school with a criminal record just as mine. And my first interaction with her was, oh, I like your shirt. I don't know if anybody's been incarcerated, but right, you get the white t-shirts. But if you want the color t-shirts like green or orange or whatever color for a sentence and pretrial, you had to pay for it. And she says, oh, I like your shirt. And I said, just took it off and handed it to her. But those qualities really come from, growing up with an old school grandma. I grew up with my grandparents, maternal grandparents, because my mom struggled with substance use and mental health. And she was always there to swipe us up out of my mom's house, and we spent majority of our time with my grandmother. And she was that person. My grandma was like a landmark in the north end of Springfield. I remember being in upstate prison and taking out my album and people saying, oh, that's the lady that sells limbes in the north end. And I didn't even know these people, right? And they would tell me stories of, oh, she's great. On Sundays, she fed me and she would give me limbes. Or I remember somebody said to me, your grandma was harm reduction before harm reduction was a thing, because she would give us her like bulk, like when she had extra her insulin needles, right? She would give us to us and always remind us not to share. But my grandmother had children, nieces and nephews. She had brothers that were also IV drug users. So she was hip to this, right? And this is back when the kits only had the little metal container in the water and the cotton swab. Now we've advanced. Now we got bigger kits, right? But and I remember somebody telling me that and framing me here in prison about my grandmother. But my grandmother was that person, and they instilled in me, that empathetic lens and that inclusion of, independent of where people were, what they looked like, what they were going through, to lend a helping hand. She was just awesome, and I miss her dearly. And thanks for that question, Scotty, because even like she was also really true to judging people by their behavior and not what they said. And that those are some of the values that she instilled in me that I brought into the incarceral setting. Granted, the incarceral setting is not a place to make friends, but I met a lot of good people that made bad choices. And yeah, there were some people who deep trauma had them really angry and not nice, right? But through that behavior, through them exposing that behavior, I just learned to keep to myself and to the people who showed, an empathetic heart. But that was a great question, Scotty. Thank you for allowing me to that question, because it allowed me to remember my grandmother in that way. She was popular, like everybody knew my grandma. People knew I remember one day when I was still actively using, trying to rush to the liquor store down the street from her house before they closed. And when I pulled in the liquor store, she was hanging outside playing dominoes with two of the young guys from the neighborhood. And I'm like, is that my grandma? Everybody knew her because of her giving self, and having a spot in her back hallway where she had a it's called a gaucho, where it's like a military bed. It's like a hammock in a metal frame, that she would let people sleep there, like in the winter, when it was cold outside. And she just, instilled a lot of values of humanity and giving back and not caring what situation they were in. She was pretty dope.
Thank you.
That's beautiful,
We have
Daisy.
time
Thank you
for
so
one
much.
more. We have time for one more question. Denise?
Yeah, I wasn't really gonna ask a question. I was just more gonna make a comment. First, thank you, Daisy, for sharing your story and a whole lot of stuff that I didn't know about you that I do now, which is a good thing. And I was just sitting back thinking when you had said in the beginning that you were nervous, and I'm like, that just flew off your shoulders after a while, because you was just up there, boy. The information just was flowing out of you. But I appreciate your candidacy about just like your own personal biases, which was really good to hear. Just, and not in a negative way, it was in a positive way, because that's your passion. And often I too, as a woman of color, I come from a place where sometimes your passion is misconstrued for aggressive or, just the things that you can be labeled with just based off of what you look like, right? And so just hearing your journey is inspiring, because it just means that once again, as women, we know we're not alone, that, we all share some common denominators when it comes to sharing our truth. And then also congratulations on the educational piece, because I come from a place too where my mother, if she didn't do anything else, she always said, finish school, get your high school diploma, get your education. It's so important. You're going to need it in life, and then having that, that determination to go to school and get my degree and things like that. And it took a while to do it, but I did it. So, it's kind of like, it's never too late. Anybody, you can always better yourself. So I just wanted to say thank you for your candidacy and your information. And it was just so good to hear you.
Thank you so much, Denise.
Daisy, because I want to give Mary Ann, she can wrap it up, but I hope you are eligible now for joining our roundtable. And that's for discussion around how we can partner with people and help them with technical assistance. And, we can talk more about that, at a later date.
Oh,
But we would
definitely
love
come
to,
in.
yeah, we would love to have you. And then Mary Ann, last words?
Oh, my last words, Julie?
No.
Well, I'll say this, Daisy, you have given us a lasting impression for forever, and we thank you in a very, very positive way. And thank you everyone for joining us at our monthly DEI speaker series. And we look forward to going forward in a very positive way. Thank you again, Daisy.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite, Mary
Thank you,
Ann.
everybody, for coming on.
Thanks, everybody.